You know, police cost way more than you would have ever expected. Broadcasting from the Hip Hop Weekly Studios, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Civic Cypher. I'm your host, Ramses Ja.
He is Ramses Ja. Mm-hmm. I am Bout It.
We were listening to some Master P earlier.
Okay, just so that people can know how I felt today. I'm also Q Ward, and you are listening to Civic Cypher.
Indeed, and we got a lot for you to stick around for today, including that very subject. We're going to be talking about exactly how much police cost cities, you know, especially the way that, you know, policing is done and regulated and policed, dare I say. At present, it's a lot more expensive than you may know. And often enough, actually, 100% of the time, it's you and me, the taxpayers, that end up footing the bill when it comes to like police misconduct, police brutality, settling lawsuits, and even paying for police that are injured on the job. That all comes from us. And so we're going to talk about some of those things and how we ended up in the system in ways that we can kind of change how things work. Also, we're going to be talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI initiatives. You may or may not know, but recently DEI initiatives, a lot of which were started in 2020 during the mass protest over George Floyd, a lot of those initiatives have come under attack from the right, from conservatives. And there are a lot of people that say the DEI either doesn't work or it is like reverse discrimination, or all these other narratives that people are trying to sow into the minds and the hearts of the American people. And so we figured we'd give you a little bit of substance and facts, because that's what we deal with on this show, so that you can push back if that ever makes its way, that conversation ever makes its way to you. But first and foremost, we are going to start off, as always, with some Ebony Excellence.
Shall we?
We shall. So today's Ebony Excellence is sponsored by Major Threads. For innovative, fashionable sportswear, check majorthreads.com. And I'm going to be sharing from The Verge. Comedian and media mogul Byron Allen has reportedly made a $10 billion offer to acquire the ABC TV network, FX, and National Geographic cable channels and local stations from Walt Disney, according to a report from Bloomberg. The publication's source claims that the offer is preliminary and could change, and that Allen would work with banks and private equity firms to finance the deal, which is standard. That's how these things tend to work. The offer for ABC isn't an unusual move for Allen. The comedian turned producer has invested $1.3 billion over the last few years to add new assets to his media portfolio, including the Weather Channel and a string of local stations from Honolulu to Tucson. And the reason I wanted to talk about Byron Allen and this maneuver as an example of Ebony Excellence is because in my life, this sort of conversation even is something that is new. This is something that behind the scenes, there were a lot of people that worked toward in the 80s. You know, some of the names, some of these people have fell from prominence. But we recognize on this show, at least, that anybody that's moving to create opportunities, that's trying to be a black voice in the room, someone that has some additional perspective and that has the corporate sophistication and the fiscal backing to make these things happen, it deserves a shout out from us. And so even though this hasn't happened, we applaud Byron Allen as an example of Ebony Excellence for at least getting this conversation started and giving hope to all of us who would like to see that happen. Now, let's talk about how much the police cost. Okay. So let me give you a little bit of backstory. As you may or may not know, Q and I both share content all week long prior to recording the show. We share content and then we have a meeting before we actually turn on the cameras and the lights and the microphones, and we decide what portion of the 90% that we're going to leave on the cutting room floor.
There's a lot that we don't get to talk about.
Yeah, sure. But recently, this came from Q. He sent over a post from Sean King. Sean King is an activist, for those that don't know, who is very high profile activist, someone that we both look up to. And who has supported us in our journey as well. But again, someone who he's worked in the activist space much longer than we have. And again, someone that we look up to for a lot of a lot of his thinking and the way he processes information. So he put up a post, and his post said, over the past decade, these 10 NYPD cops accounted for more than $68 million in misconduct payouts. All of them are still on the public payroll. The post goes on to cite an article from The Gothamist, and the headline of the article reads, over a decade, 10 NYPD officers accounted for $68 million in police misconduct payouts, report. So first and foremost, I know that this is kind of illuminating specifically the New York Police Department. But the fact is that this is true largely around the country. It is very, very difficult for police to be held accountable for any sort of misconduct. It's very difficult to even bring about some sort of attention that gets a proper investigation when it comes to police. They're very well fortified and insulated from consequences due to not just qualified immunity, which I do want to talk about a little bit more later on, but also police unions. I think at some point, I think either we had the conversation or I read recently that becoming a police officer is the safest job in the country. It's almost like impossible to get fired from it. And you'd probably have an easier time getting kicked out of the military. And so this allows for those bad apples. By the way, follow us on social media because we've been having a discourse about bad apples and good apples and what happens to the good apples. But this framework allows for those bad apples to not only cross the line and cost the taxpayers money, but also to become repeat offenders, as we'll soon see. So I know you wanted to share a couple of thoughts. So let's get you to weigh in here, and then we'll get back to the post.
The most difficult thing about not just qualified immunity, but the very, very strong union protection and insulation that officers have is the indoctrination of citizens, right? Because the qualified immunity and protection from their unions typically keep them employed and keep them out of prison. But that implication of money that when they mess up, we pay for it, citizens don't even care.
Yeah.
Like in any other space, we'd be outraged.
Yeah.
If our politicians do make mistakes.
I know what you're trying to say, but
it was presented the same way, especially the way the right would approach it. If a Democratic candidate or politician did something that cost taxpayers $68 million, they destroy that person with rousing support from their base. The indoctrination of the hero complex kind of that we've given to our law enforcement officers keeps us from even being upset by headlines like that. Like, you think the people of New York would take to the streets as an angry mob to, protest and, storm the Capitol, quote unquote, with regards to having to pick up the tab.
This is Maggie B. Noen, and we'll be right back with more Civic Cypher after a quick break.
I'm Donald Trump.
And I'm Joe Biden.
And there's only one thing that could bring me and Sleepy Joe together.
Come on, man. Don't corn pop me.
That's in support of the Independent Riot podcast, where they interview independent thinkers on controversial ideas like the dangers of voice cloning technology.
But is it available on any gramophone machine, Donald?
Yes, Joe, it is. And it's bigly important. Many people are saying, that's the Independent Riot podcast. Not right, not left, just real. Subscribe now.
Or I'll sock you in your mouth, Jack.
On the misconduct. But not only is no one outraged, not only are these 10 officers, so that part again, 10 officers being responsible for 68 million is so much. Still employed. Probably still in the same position. I'm guessing they probably didn't lose any rank, no salary decrease, slap on the wrist, get to say you're sorry, probably some type of paid leave. Take a couple weeks off. Your checks will still be there. No problem. Just, collect yourself and we'll see you on the 1st. There's so many things built in. No public outrage, no accountability, and no loss in money by the officers. Why be a good apple? Why would you even consider it when you're the type of person that applies for a job that allows you to actually do anything you want, unless it's like gross, unavoidable, unhideable misconduct? You're kind of straight. Mm-hmm. It's really, really, we're really up against it with regards to that.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned, if it's something that you can't hide, because often on this show, the stories that we tell are stories of police cover-ups. They work together in concert to cover up the offenses or transgressions of their fellow officers.
And not just officers, medical examiners,
sure.
Paramedics. Like, we've read stories where medical examiners have said a person that was beat to death died from a pre-existing heart condition. Like,
absolutely.
It's intense, man.
So the crazy part about that is that the stories that do make their way to us are stories that the cover-up wasn't effective. And so that leads us to often question how many cover-ups never make their way to us, how many cover-ups by the police are successful. And the crazy,
I guess a very high percentage, because
the data would support that. Yeah.
They're investigating their own misconduct. Mm-hmm. The police police the police.
Yep, exactly. That'd be like me stealing something or doing something. I don't know, pick a crime.
Yes, and then stealing something,
and then I'm responsible,
patting you down to find the thing you stole.
Yeah,
I say, hey,
I didn't.
Nothing there.
Yeah, exactly. And then
I watched me pat myself, right? Yeah, nothing. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. And if the logic holds up, you realize that that's asinine. But again, where this was taking me was that, and we talked about this on the show before, the police are not quite like other industries or enterprises or operations. The police, how about this? We talk about capitalism a lot on this show, and for better or worse, we live in a capitalistic society. We often deal with the worst facets and aspects of capitalism on this show, but that's the society that we live in. And capitalism, to be fair, has its benefits. It does drive innovation. It does drive, not unlike other things, but to those that would applaud capitalism,
I'd argue, however,
there are other
that innovation and
that
all of that would exist even
exactly. That's
in a different.
That's what I'm trying to say. But I'm not. I don't want to focus on capitalism as much as I do the capitalistic forces that are at play in the majority of our society. If someone builds a laptop and you buy the laptop and it breaks and it's cheap and it doesn't work, then the next time you're not going to buy that laptop. You're going to buy a better laptop, right? And that incentive of, someone building a bad laptop incentivizes competition to build a better laptop so that consumers have that as an option, right? And so there's a better alternative out there in that scenario underneath the capitalistic model and under other models. But again, we live under capitalism. Police are not subjected to being any better. I'll take it a step further. Something that maybe lies a little bit, or maybe it's a little bit different. It's not so capitalistic as this laptop model. Let's try a hospital. If I'm sick and I go to hospital A and they treat me very bad and they're not really giving me the right medicine, I have to go back a ton of times. And then a year later, I get sick again. I go to hospital B and they do much better. Then I get to choose hospital B into the future. If I'm ever sick, if my children get sick, my family gets sick, hospital A doesn't get as many patients. They don't get as much income coming in, and eventually they go the way of the dodo, right? Police, again, are not subject to those type of forces. There's only one number you can call and one department that'll respond, provided that it's in a certain jurisdiction. And so again, there's no incentive, there's no competition, there's nothing driving police to be any better. And because we've all been influenced, we, meaning Ramses included, Ramses is the voice that you're hearing right now. Me, I've been subjected to these sources too. In particular, propaganda. And for those that don't know, propaganda is the subtle influence of police stories over the years through entertainment, movies and media and so forth. The police are always the good guys, and they're always unless it's Denzel for some reason. I don't want to make any connections there, but I'll leave you to do it for yourself. I'm talking about the movie Training Day. But for the most part, police are always the good guys and they're always catching the bad guys. And so we've learned to trust the police. Well, that is something that was curated for the public. And it started with a show called Dragnet in Los Angeles. And in order to get those real police stories, the producers worked with the police on the episodes. And the police wanted to make sure, I think it was the police union or the police community affairs office, whatever it was, they worked with the producers of the show to make sure that the police were always presented in a positive light. So you never got stories of police cover-ups. You never got stories of corruption. You never got that sort of stuff. You only got one side of it. So over decades, the public, myself included, became indoctrinated to assume that the police were always the good guy. And I don't want to be too harsh on police because I do realize that for the most part, police are who you call. And for the most part, they do the job of police, I guess. But the error rate is enormous and disproportionately affects poor people, brown people, and Black people. Hence this entire show that we do every single week now for years, plural.
The interesting thing is that even in, cases of media, television and film, where there is a bad officer portrayed, that indoctrination kicks in, where we see that person as an outlier. We don't look at like, man, look how corrupt the police are. It's very, very unique to the individual that we're pointing to, i.e. Denzel in Training Day. And of course, there have been other examples, but it's the bad actor or bad faith actors in those settings. The movie doesn't have to explain to us that's unusual. Our minds automatically assume so because, as you said, the police are the good guys.
Yeah. And, there's something else here, too. When we're talking about who's establishing sort of the bar for police, often there is no governing body that has a bar that is sufficient. And I say often because I'm trying to use loose language, but the truth is there is no governing body that establishes a bar that is sufficient for all people, like the FAA, for instance. If for the Federal Aviation Administration, if an airplane crashes, you know what? If a person dies while in the care of an airline, it's a 5-alarm fire. And they will push to ensure best they can that never, ever happens again. Okay. And there's no commission or oversight or investigative body like that for police in the United States because it's, based on jurisdiction and that sort of thing. There's no real federal oversight when it comes to this sort of stuff. No meaningful federal oversight, I should say. And so imagine if for every 100 flights that took off, one flight crashed. That would be unacceptable in this society.
Some point at that rate, people would stop flying.
Sure.
That's way too often.
But you know what? Let's go for every 1,000 flights, 10,000 flights that took off, one would crash. How about every 100,000 flights, one would crash? Are we starting to border on police numbers, or have we already surpassed it? I suspect we've surpassed it. In terms of police misconduct, where people are killed unnecessarily. Okay. Now let's dial it back. Let's make it live in a more meaningful context for you, our listener. If that's unacceptable, then we need to question why we are so comfortable accepting the reality when it comes to police officers, because they also deal in life and death situations. They are the ones often introducing the dangerous element to the equation, then get scared. When they are well protected, they have the weapon,
then say that they're scared.
Yeah. And someone's running away.
Going back and forth on this for years.
They say they're scared. They're not really scared. I
do not believe that these things are happening because these people are afraid or fear for their lives.
Right.
When you showed up and you drew your gun and you shot someone
who was running away.
I'm very, very curious as to how you're the one that was afraid for your life in that scenario.
I always think of a gentleman, I believe his name was, I believe it was like Rayshard Brooks. I posted on Instagram. It was some years back, but before we started doing the show, but I was still kind of very vocal about these sort of incidents where he was at a fast food restaurant in the middle of the night. He'd been drinking, pulled his car over to go to sleep in the parking lot. Police showed up, tried to investigate, whatever. He was being cooperative. Then the tables turned. They're like, oh, we're going to arrest you. And he starts freaking out. So he starts trying to run away. Again, Black people, as a rule, the police haven't been very kind to us as a people over the years. And you can look at the police, how they handled Dr. King. Look at how they sicked the dogs on the protesters, the fire hoses, and all that stuff. That was when they started filming it. It's been that way ever since the slave patrols. Okay. Historically, we don't rock with the police because they have never treated us all that good. So Rayshard tries to run from the police. He's drunk. Can't run, none of this sort of stuff. They shot him in his back. Boom, 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 as he's running away, and he died. Okay. Officers can say they were scared. They could say anything. Anything. They were scared for the people that were across the street, as if Rayshard, a drunk man who was sleeping in his car, is going to run across the street and attack someone else or whatever. You know what I mean? They always come up with some version of the story that paints them as the victim and, the Black man unarmed in a lot of instances as the aggressor. And then the lawsuits come and you end up paying for it. And so instead of
the officer gets to keep their job.
And that too. And
while being investigated, go on paid administrative leave.
And so let me add to that. So Sean King, for his article, he added this. He says, this is what we are up against. One cop had 48 cases settled against him. That's in New York. And is still on the force. One cop beat a child until he was paralyzed, and it cost the city $12 million. And he kept his job. No job in the country is more secure than this one. In what other profession could any of this happen and you still keep your job? My own organization would fire me if I behaved like this. So let me just mention a couple of things that show how taxpayer resources are squandered with police. And then often, the police are shaping outcomes, life and death outcomes for people that, as we see, don't always deserve that. Task forces that don't produce results. We've talked about that sort of stuff. Drug task force, and they only get one gun off the street or one bag of drugs or whatever.
And then pose for a picture with it.
Right. Increased police presence that doesn't reduce crime rates. It does not do that. We've talked about that many times on the show. Spending money wisely for the community, for the benefit of the community, that impacts crime rates. Some of the solutions to consider, though, is that police should carry insurance like doctors. If they become uninsurable because of lawsuits, they won't be on the force anymore. And ending qualified immunity. That's a big one. And also just defunding the police, because that will actually reallocating police resources. Branded others defunding the police will impact crime rates better than police will.